So, Chipko was a movement from which I learnt a lot. फिर 84 में पंजाब का problem हुआ, and then I studied what was the Green Revolution. I studied what had happened to farming, because I had grown up with farms with diversity, no chemicals, And then in 87, the chemical corporations, I was invited to a meeting on, it was called Laws of Life, the Future of Biotechnology. Nobody knew what it would mean. There was no GMO in 1987. They arrived in America in 92. And when I asked the farmers of America, I said, why are you growing GMO soya? They said, the companies have a noose round our neck. We can only grow the seeds they tell us to grow because that's the only thing they'll buy from us. And the whole system of seed procurement was one system. So at this meeting, when the chemical companies said, we have to do genetic engineering in order to take patents on seed. Now, a patent is a monopoly created by inventing something new. It's a claim to an invention. So I said, but you don't create the seed. And they said, no, we're going to redefine it as a manufacture, as an industrial product. And the reason genetic engineering is important is because the only way it allows us to say that we have made it, by shooting a gene. So I've always said later, over time, I said it's like, you brought your bags, You brought a bag. Can you claim, because of the fact that you came with a bag, that you created the Navdanya farm? You can't. Adding a gene does not create the organism. In fact, because you're adding a toxic gene, it creates pollution. So from that meeting onwards, I started to save seeds. That's why I started Navdanya. But I'm a scientist, so I also apply my mind. I studied the Green Revolution. Why did we use chemicals? When I started to study GMOs in biotechnology, on the one hand, we started to save seeds because I didn't accept that we would be dependent on 5 chemical companies for seed. They said there'll be 5 of us by the turn of the century. There are 4 of them now. And they're the companies that make the chemicals. They redesign seed to sell more chemicals. So if you look at the biggest selling GMO is a Roundup Ready GMO. Roundup Ready means it's designed to have more and more sprays of glyphosate and Roundup. Just today I've had a set of questions from a journalist on this. So, but it reduces pesticides. No, look at any data. How much was the increase? 5,000% was the increase in the use of glyphosate since GMOs were introduced in America. And I don't know if you know that there are something like more than 100,000 cases now of people who've got cancer, because glyphosate is a known carcinogen. So people who've got all kinds of cancers are now suing because, the United Nations, WHO, said it's a carcinogen. The minute this report came out, they started to go to the courts. And the first case is a case of a person who used to spray Roundup on lawns, and Johnson, his name is, and he won the first case. And since then, 3-4 others have won. And Bayer, which bought Monsanto, has lost more money than it spent on buying Monsanto because of these court cases. So in all of these years, when I started, David Hopper was the one who really financed. I think he was head of Rockefeller Foundation in India at that time. And then he became vice president of World Bank. But I remember I was in a debate with him in Guelph in Canada. And he said, now it's not going to be like the Green Revolution. There'll be no side effect. We'll grow food on the moon, we'll grow food in the Sahara, and we'll grow food in toxic jumps because we will be able to invent any trait in any seed. What has happened since that time? 2 traits. One, herbicide resistant, which is a toxic trait, and the other, Bt toxin. So Bt is a soil organism, Bacillus thuringiensis, but when you pull out the gene from it to express the, in the soil, it does no harm, nor does it do harm to other species than the caterpillar, in whose gut it becomes a toxin. But now it's a ready-made toxin. They call it a high-dose toxin, expressed in every root, every leaf, every pollen. We have one of our colleagues, she's on maternity leave right now, she did a PhD on this farm. And then I sent her to the Bt cotton area in Vidarbha in Maharashtra. She did not find one pollinator, one bee on the Bt cotton plants. We've also done research with the top soil ecologist of India. And we did the work when less than 10 years of Bt cotton had been cultivated, but about 60% of the beneficial soil organisms had been killed. Because this toxin is killing the bees, it's killing the soil organism. And it doesn't work to control pests. So you have Bt to control pests, and you have HT, as they call it, herbicide tolerant, Roundup tolerant, to control weeds. What is the history now of the Bt? Farmers are dying because not only are they are in debt because of the high cost seed. The seed doesn't work, they get it on credit 3-4 times. Like I said the other day, 400,000 farmers, of which 85% are in the cotton area. There's government data, you can map it. You can map it, and the districts where the cotton is grown is where the highest peaking of suicides are. But farmers are dying because they are using more pesticides, because it's not controlling pests, they're new pests. So I think it was 2017, I had to rush down because I think 130 farmers died because of spraying. And when I went, the hospital had been converted into an emergency. And there were all these farmers in emergency because of pesticide spraying. Now, who are these farmers? They're the landless workers. And I remember I stopped once on a field in Vidarbha, and I got off, and this guy was spraying. I said, "Do you know what you're doing?" Talking about Hindi. Pesticides kill. That's what this work is. Pesticides kill insects. Except that all insects are not pests. Most of them are beneficial, the bees, the butterflies are beneficial. And the Hindi of pesticide was converted very cleverly to be Keetnashak Dawai, as if it's a medicine. So it lulls the farmer into thinking, it's safe. Anyway, so I stopped to see this farmer, and I said, this is poison. And he said, yeah, we get dizzy, we faint, but we are poor. And we do this for a living. I said, but death isn't a way of life. When I saw the first farmer's suicide in Punjab, again in the Bt cotton area, farmers spraying, same conversation. And this young man says, now I understand why I get dizzy and have to lie down after I spray the field. I can't keep standing. So farmers are dying because of debt, and farmers are dying because of pesticide poisoning. So a pest control technology hasn't controlled pests. That's the first measure, is the technology successful? In the case of the United States, most of the crops are Roundup ready. As I said, it's grown 5,000% in trees of glyphosate. But it hasn't controlled the weeds, because this idea of a dead earth is everything's inert. So they don't realize that all of life has intelligence and evolves. So when you put too much antibiotics, your bugs become antibiotic resistant. And that antibiotic resistance is one of the biggest killer diseases now. People are dying in hospitals because they can't be cured. When you spray too much Roundup, the weeds that you were supposed to control become resistant. So there's something called the Palmer amaranth. Amaranth, for us is Ramdana. The seed is called Ramdana and the leaves are, it's a sacred plant. It's now so resistant, it's so thick that they're using axes to cut it in America. Half of the farmland of America is overtaken by superweeds, cannot be farmed. So that's your story of GMOs. But the second story of GMOs is Monsanto had no role in seeds. It hasn't evolved a single seed. Hello. Hello. And what it did was, its background is in Agent Orange. So it knows how to manipulate. And what it started to do was go after companies that had done the early GMO work and sue them, then buy them out. Like the first BT cotton company was Agrocetus. Monsanto sued them, buy them out. And that's how they took control over most of the seed companies of the world. In India, 80% of the seed was in farmers' hands. Of the remaining 25%, 15% was government public breeding, and about 5% was some companies in some crops like cotton. Monsanto went to these companies and said, we had a patent. Now these companies make seed, they produce seed, they do hybrids. They don't understand law of patents, etc. So they started to paying huge royalties to Monsanto. The seed cost jumped from 5 rupees to 4,000 rupees a kilo. And because the seed failed, in effect it meant about, 12,000, 16,000 rupees per kilo every season. Farmers were in debt. Then Monsanto put a second gene, it's called BT2, Volga 2. And by putting the second gene, they said, now we've got to have more royalties. That's when the Indian companies said, we cannot extract more from the farmers. As it is, the farmers are dying. So Monsanto sued them. So they came rounding to me, ma'am, you know about patenting. So I said, show me your agreement, licensing agreement. Licensing agreement has a patent in the United States, because in India you can't take a patent on. See, that much work I did for this country. We put a clause in our patent law, plants, animals and seeds are not human inventions, therefore they cannot be patented. So Monsanto never had a patent, could not take a patent on the seed. They could take a patent on the technique of introducing a GM trait, but not the seed in the field. So I told these guys, I said, why did you give so much money? I said, this patent doesn't apply in India. They had no idea that patent law is national law. A US patent does not apply to India. Only world patents then become, applicable everywhere. So these cases went on for very long. I joined because I was defending Article 3J. I said, they aren't allowed to have a patent on seed. So in effect, and then the government was forced to bring down the prices because they were charging what they wanted. It was a big control order called the Seed Price Control Order. So when you ask me about GMOs, the biggest question about GMOs is the patent aspect. The second is a failed technology aspect. Yeah? And the third is, can we do that job better? Yeah. Controlling pests and controlling weeds, you do it through diversity. Yeah. So I have a book that's that thick called Origin, The Plunder of Nature and Knowledge, because some publisher wanted me to put all my work. And I had an older book called Enclosures of the Commons, and I realized it had stopped in '97. And so I had to update it with all the other work I'd done. And the book Origin is all of these issues and an element that is linked to the patenting. So having done GMOs and having introduced patents on life, then the companies could take a patent on anything that existed.